what we're looking at is what are some of the basic constructs in Sunbird Ed. Okay. So this is more from the learn side where we are organizing. Actually, it's a mix of Ed and knowledge right now. Okay. So there is orgs. Then you have channels. You have frameworks. And of course you have users. So there is no entity called as tenants in Sunbird. Okay. Tenant is more of an abstract concept. So tenant essentially is a root org. Okay. So when you create a root org, associate a channel to it, framework to it, it's just a way of calling it as a tenant. But essentially a tenant is really a root org. Okay.
What is the instance?
I'll come to that. So instance is basically an installation of Sunbird where you can create as many root orgs as you want. Installation is instance.
Okay.
One Sunbird installation is one instance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now what you do is that you create a root org. Okay. In Sunbird, when you create a root org, it auto creates a channel. Okay. But it doesn't need to be that way. You can also separately create a channel. Okay. And you can associate the channel to the root org separately.
And can a root org have multiple channels?
No, it can't. It can only have one channel at a time.
It's one to
Okay.
one.
But you can associate the same channel to multiple root orgs.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yes. And the third thing is a framework.
So can you show that in the diagram, Ashwin? Because effectively,
Probably.
okay, so one channel can be shared between multiple root
O1,
orgs.
O2, there is channel 1. You can have the same channel set to both the orgs.
I see.
Okay. And there is a concept called as framework. So framework is a way to organize. So it's a taxonomy thing. So you create a framework and you create the taxonomy under it. So for example, in Diksha context, each board has their own framework, and within the board, the normal taxonomy is to create board, grade, medium, subject as a taxonomy. So there is a NCRT framework, there is a SSE framework, CBSE framework. So each board is typically a framework, right? And what you do is that you set for every channel, you set the default framework that is for that channel. Okay. For each
Again, when
channel,
you say default, it means you can have multiple.
you can have.
frameworks.
So basically, right now it's not into the multiple framework case because it's a little complex. But each channel can have two basic things: one default framework and another course framework.
Part
Right?
is called channel, or what is exactly channel means?
Yeah.
Part is
Okay, come-
different from root
Yeah,
org.
come to that. So I mean, traditionally, courses and content were looked at as kind of two key things in Sunbird. That's why channels have these two properties: default framework and default course framework. But both could be the same. I mean, I think in most cases now we are setting both the default framework and default course framework to be just the same framework, because I mean, typically you won't have separate taxonomy just for content and a separate taxonomy just for courses. Usually you'll have all encompassing taxonomy, so that's how you do it. So channel is just think of a channel as I mean, just a means to connect everything else. Okay. So think of a way where tomorrow if you want to change a root org channel, it's possible. Okay. Can't imagine a lot of use cases, but this is how it is. So channel essentially is think of it like a tag, really. A tag that can have a lot of metadata associated to it, framework being one of it, right? And I mean, essentially what you're calling a tenant is basically a combination of these two: root org associated to a unique channel.
But channel ID and org ID is the same, no?
It is the same. That's what I said in the beginning. So today in Sunbird, they have written it in such a way that when you create a root org, it auto creates a channel with the same ID as that of the org ID. But that need not be the case. You can actually create a separate channel and also assign it to the same root org, reassign it to the same root org. But what you have to understand is that there are three different entities: root org, channel, and framework. So framework is a property of the channel, not a direct property of the root org. So you are associating framework to channel and channel to root org. Okay. And under root org, of course, you have users, user 1, user 2. So users are part of the, if you kind of draw this, U1, 3. So all these users are associated to the org1. Then you have U2 1, U2 2, U2 3. These users are associated to the organization. So this is how it is set up as of today. Okay.
So now when you have content, right? So when you mean content, it could be any kind of resources, I believe.
Yeah.
So can you also explain, and course is a type of collection, I believe,
Yes.
right? So how are they associated with the framework?
Yeah. So now the way it works is that, and I could be slightly wrong, but the way it works is that let's say user logs in, okay, and when the user logs in, he is part of an org, and the org can be derived through to a framework. So when the user logs in, we know what org is part of, what channel is it, and what default framework is it. So when you go to the creation page, based on the framework that is for your org, it kind of
Will show the
updates, it kind of loads the form for that framework. So when you are creating a, let's say, content, a PDF, you will see the taxonomy fields for the framework that your org is using. Okay, so you choose all those taxonomy, save the content. When you save the content, against the content, it is stamping the org, it is stamping the channel, it is stamping the framework and the taxonomy fields of the framework, and of course the values of all of this. So that's how the content is created. Now later they also introduced a way where you could so if there's multiple frameworks, okay, you could set some kind of association for the same content key for this content. Additional frameworks are X, and the values of those frameworks taxonomies. I mean, let's not get into that, it's a little complex, but technically it's also possible to have a content taxonomy under multiple frameworks. But I think that's a very fringe use case right now. But essentially all content is stamped with org ID, channel, framework, and all the values of the field. And of course, creator is the user who created it, all those kind of.
So basically, tenant is not a first class concept.
Tenant is abstract concept.
Abstract concept.
which
That's
is-
basically effectively the root org and channel.
Yeah.
And because you're saying root org, I believe you can have sub organizations.
Yeah. Yes. So now a root org can have as many sub orgs. So root org can have, it is right here. So this is sub org 1. You could have sub org 2. So each org can have any number of sub orgs, and the sub orgs can have their own users.
And can users be shared across sub orgs
No, right now the way it works is that each user can only be part of exactly one org. It could be a sub org
or a root
or it could
org?
be the root org.
Okay.
But the content framework that belongs to channel
Yeah.
can be associated
Yes.
to new organization if it
So the framework can be, so framework is linked to the channel, right?
and channel can be
Channel can be
associated
linked to any number of organizations.
any root
Yes,
organization.
but you can also do it like you said. So you create, I mean, typically, like I said, right now the way Sunbird behaves is that when you create a root org, it auto
You
creates a channel.
automatically create.
So you can actually look at this as a one-to-one thing. But the same framework can be associated to as many channels.
But if now we are building an